Hello, everyone. This will be our lecture over Queen Elizabeth I and her two speeches. The speech to the troops at Tilbury and the Golden Speech. And so let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth I. The Elizabethan period is named after her, and she reigns from 1558 to her death in 1603. And and then she's succeeded by King James I of the Stuart dynasty. So she's the last in the line of the Tudor dynasty that basically, ruled over England for pretty much the entire 16th century. And she herself was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who we discussed. We discussed Anne Boleyn, who eventually became the wife of Henry VIII when we talked about Wyatt. And so she is one of the few daughters. In fact, she was a disappointment to her father, King Henry VIII, because he wanted a male heir. Male heirs were considered, males were considered the stronger and more suited to rule as kings. And in fact, her half brother, um, Edward, ended up ruling very briefly before Queen Mary came. So Elizabeth I, her time of rule, she ruled for quite a while, from 1558 to 1603, nearly half a century. And she is known for her deft handling of political affairs. In fact, she had a great reputation as the Virgin Queen. And her time is usually considered is is usually marked as like the golden age in English history, because she was known as a very reputable queen, one who never married. She had plenty of suitors, and toyed with them like a kind of like a coquette in a way. Um, Toyed with their proposals and entertained different suitors, from the Duke of Anjou and others from Spain. If you see the film, it kind of dramatizes the way that she plays with them, but she never marries. In fact, she ends up saying that she's married to her country. And you see that, in fact, that language of love, the love language of the court, kind of predominates her speeches. Especially the Golden Speech, where she puts the love of her country before any regard for herself. And so that kind of courtly love that we've talked about, dating back all the way back to Sir Gawain and even now, predominates the sphere of Elizabeth I. It was a very ostentatious court. It was one of reverence. And in fact, people, when courtiers kneel to her, they spoke to her in language as if they were unrequited lovers, because that was the fashion. And she herself, was rigorously educated, very smart. She was suspected of being a Protestant sympathizer, which she was, during the Catholic reign of Queen Mary. However, she was able to, maneuver through that to not, she was in prison tower. She wasn't, tried for treason or anything like that, which would have been. In fact, she succeeded, and she immediately turned England back into a Protestant nation. So again, that musical chairs of religion continues with Elizabeth. She was rigorously educated, could speak. I believe it was she could speak. She could speak French and Italian and read Latin and Greek, so she was very well known for her education. In fact, you see some influences from writers like Petrarch in her letters and the like. And she herself, like when we get to the Fairy Queen of Edmund Spenser, she is the titular Fairy Queen. She was that regarded as if she was some kind of fairy tale figure, and she knew how to, despite the attitudes towards the female sex as being the weaker one, she was still able to navigate the political sphere in a way that embraced that as a strength. For example, on page 762, we get the speech to the troops at Tilbury. One of her most famous quotes comes from this speech. So the circumstance around this is that there are powers. So one of the reasons many suitors were trying to court her was that it would shift the balance in European politics. Say, a prince of Spain were to marry Elizabeth, that would give Spain and England a lot of power. Their armies would be joined together as allies. And when she didn't marry, and following the call for her assassination by Pope Gregory, other powers, such as the Spanish Armada, looked to invade in 1588. And so before the invasion, she gives a speech, and it's the speech she's at Tilbury. They never had to fight the battle, but just the sentiment of um, you know, of her going amongst her troops, and as she says on page 762, I tell you, I would not desire to live to distrust my faithful loving people, that tyrants fear. I have so behaved myself that under God I have placed my chiefest strength and safeguard in the loyal hearts and goodwill of my subjects. And so that language of appealing to that she is almost a one, that she loves them is part of what, causes her to mingle amongst them. I mean, in fact, history accounts usually kind of describe her as bearing armor and going on horseback to give them the speech. In fact, she even says, like, and it's a more rhetorical sentiment, but it still kind of pervades the rhetoric of the time, where she says, being resolved in the heat of battle, this is on 763, to live and die amongst you all. As one of them, that she's not some distant, separated king who doesn't care about her subjects. She presents herself in a way that, establishes a connection to them. And what about the fact that she's a woman? Well, she addresses that, where she says, I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman. So she, confirms their prejudice. But I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. So she tries to rewrite her gender weakness and says that, she may be born a woman, but she has just as much heart of a king. That she can have that manly assertiveness that they are desiring. And so that's the intended rhetorical effect, is that she can be a king, regardless of her sex. In fact, it kind of relates to the political theory of the time of the king's two bodies, that there's the mortal, frail body, and then there's the more everlasting office of the king, which is a political construct. And so, and she presents herself as loving her people, even willing to die amongst them, and that she does have the heart of the king, so it rouses them, gives them passion. The Golden Speech, too, is laden with love speech. Like on page 764, where she first addresses them. There is no jewel, be it of so never rich a price, which I set before this jewel, I mean your loves. And that's what lovers do in like Petrarchan poetry as well, that they set the lover above all jewels, above all riches. For I do more esteem it than any treasure or riches, for that we know how to prize, but love and thanks I count unvaluable. And though God hath raised me high, yet this I count the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your loves. So this is the Golden Speech is one of her last speeches. I mean, he mentions it's conducted in 1601, and it's not even published until about the 1620s. I believe it's like 1628, if I remember correctly. Yes. And so it's indicative of the love language that she uses. She's addressing Parliament, particularly it sounds like the House of Lords, because she mentions to them to pass this down to the House of Commons, which there is two houses, House of Lords and House of Commons. And she even says that she's so glad to have been a queen over so thankful a people. So she invokes the religious element, but she also, the focus as far as giving thanks is on her people themselves and how she is so satisfied by the love that they give her that she tries to, she mentions reciprocating it. Let's see. And the whole context of this speech is that there had been patents given out that gave certain people, like Sir Walter Raleigh, monopolies over certain industries, like taverns for Riley. And so she's here to revoke some of them. But she, despite addressing that serious issue, it's interlaced with this language of love. Like on page 765, second full paragraph, first sentence, for above all earthly treasures I esteem my people's love more than which I desire not merit. Yea, when I heard it, I could get, in fact, when she says, that my grant should be grievous to my people, and the oppressions be privileged under color of our patents, our kingly dignity shall not suffer it. Yea, when I heard, I could give no rest unto my thoughts until I had reformed it, because she felt so guilty and wrong about how she is hurting her people. Although we know the truth, again, this is just rhetorical flourish, because the truth is that she was actually very slow. I mean, it was first raised to her in 1597, and she didn't really do much about it. But she goes on to discuss, like, the burden of being a king, and the fact that she's delighted that God hath made me his instrument to maintain his truth and glory and defend the kingdom. And Again, she appeals to the zeal of her country and the willingness to venture her life for the good and safety than myself, which is kind of a recapitulation on the speech to the troops at Tilbury, that she loves the country so much she, would put them before all else. And in some ways she has by not marrying, for instance. She has claimed that she is appealing, that she is married to her country, and the language is reflective of that idea. In fact, the fact that she calls them to kiss her hand at the end is also indicative of that. So, things to remember about Elizabeth's speeches is that they address gender distinctions, gender prejudices, and the fact that the language of the court is laden with language of love. So if you have any questions, please let me know.